So I'm basically going to, and everybody has their stuff. You're making a single glove that is for both sides, right? The left is going to fit the right. You just flip it like we do for normal cut to patterns. What you want to do to start off with is give yourself a long center grain line, like normal. And this piece, like I was saying in the announcement, needs to be 20 inches is plenty, but it has to be, if you're doing a full length opera glove, like it needs to have that length to it, but the width just has to be able to go around your entire forearm naturally. So take a piece that can do that, can house your entire forearm, which I'm going to do this. And it's good to start it off by folding it right down the center. And give yourself a nice crease first. You probably know already also that the oak tag has a grain line. It has a straight grain that is really strong, and then it has a cross grain that's a little less straight, a little less rigid. It can get all crinkly and wavy on you though. And then just give yourself a long line down that crease that you just made. So now we have a section of oak tag that has a long line right down the center. This is splitting your glove right in half. The whole glove, the body of it, the main part is going to be made out of one piece. So you're tracing off your hand. It's going to be a custom glove that fits you or whoever you are tracing for. And how you want to position your arm is the first finger, your pointer finger, on the very edge of it should line up with this center line. It's going to fold right down that edge right there. So place your arm right at the center line that you drew, that big center front grain line. And the rest of your arm should be pretty close to it as well. It can be a little bit relaxed, a little bit away, because the more room that you have with the forearm is going to allow you to slouch the glove and just have a little bit more comfort. And that changes, whether you want it to be really skin tight on the forearm, whether you want it to hold itself up next to the skin. But basically just right along the edge, pointer finger on the line, on the left side of the line, depending on which side of which hand you're doing, left or right. And then, not completely spread out, but relaxed, like about like this, not fully spread like this, but a little bit relaxed. You need some space in between your fingers to be able to work and stuff. So don't do it fully together, not fully out, but just a relaxed space. And then give yourself a good strong trace around it. You don't have to, you should trace all the way around the pointer finger. Tell yourself where the thumb stops and starts. but you don't have to trace the thumb area. Leave the thumb not traced. You're just tracing the pointer finger and the rest of your middle ring and pinky. It's gonna be bumpy, don't worry about that, you correct it after. Don't get right in the crevice, so your utensil or whatever marking utensil you're using, you keep it straight up and down when you're tracing around your shape. And this is all that you need from that. You have one side that is traced out. So this is the beginning of your trace. It should just look like this. You do want to, if you didn't put like I did, I should have marked where my thumb is at. Also mark where the thumb starts and begins. Just put a little cross mark here and here. I'm going to do that right now after I put my hand back on there. But just to let you know where the thumb is positioned in relation to everything else. And you want to be a little bit generous with it. You know how when we pattern stuff, everything seems to sort of shrink. So we always want to be generous. So now that is where my thumb is. It should look about like that. So this is what I mean by be generous. Give it a little, it's like a couple millimeters around the thumb. Now, it probably looks pretty wiggly all around your fingers and everything. You're gonna straighten that up with your ruler. Each line of your hand is gonna be cleaned up, and you're gonna make the roundness at the top of your fingers perfect. That can happen before or after making the hole for the thumb, but you should definitely do it before you trace off the shape for the other side, the remaining side. So you probably need your tracing wheel for this to punch through the shape. So we have a few more pieces now. We're gonna be cutting the hole, and it's like an oblong shape, an egg with a pointy top on it. Right here, it's going to look right in the center, and it's going to be an oblong with a pointy top. And we can get this by measuring exactly around our thumb. See how long, because you might have dainty hands, you might have bigger hands. You want to see how much real estate this part of your hand takes up, and you're measuring from right here all the way around to the other big section of the hand anatomy. And so that's going to give you the width of that circle needed right here. Let me get Chanel in here. So this oblong that we're making is going to correspond with the actual little thumb pattern that we're making. And then lastly, you need tiny little gussets that go in between your fingers. So you'll have 3 little gussets that finish off in between the fingers. So if I have a thumb that is, and I'm taking like that muscle, that whole muscle on my hand that is at the base of my thumb, and I just want to give it a nice generous amount of fabric that it can move around in. So if I'm being very generous, I would say 2.5 inches. Somewhere on your pattern, give yourself another straight grain line right down the middle. And then establish your width of your thumb. We're making the thumb pattern right here. So a single grain line down the center, and then establish the width, which I saw 2.5 inches would be good for my thumb. I'm going to give myself a perpendicular line on that grain line of 2.5 inches. Should look like this. This is where it's going to be the widest part of your thumb, and it should lie at the bottom. You should position it towards the bottom of your grain line. Just from here to here, like the biggest chunk of your thumb, the meatiest part. So when you're measuring it, you're just measuring it from here all the way to here. Because think about when you wear gloves and you see gloves, you have that seam right here. For that really simple style, right, there's a seam right here, and then this whole piece is solid.
Like a shirt cross. Not like a shirt.
Okay, with this pattern now, you're going to create the entire shape that's going to surround your thumb. You want the length of your thumb, so at the very bottom of the big section to the very top of your thumb. I'm going to give mine 4.5, which is, remember, be a little bit generous with this. So from the very bottom, in which, let me say this real quick before you draw it. So if the total amount of my thumb is 4.5, from the top to the bottom of the meaty part, I need that widest part to be about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch above the bottom. So this is the widest part of my pattern. I need this section right here to curve around the bottom of my thumb like this. That's going to sit around the bottom section of the biggest part of your thumb. And so then from that bottom corner right here, you're going to cross mark your length. So mine's 4.5. I'm going to give myself a cross mark up here. So if I did a like a concave, or not concave, but a semicircle at the bottom for this area, that's gonna be the bottom cross mark for my measurement. And then start from here and measure 4.5 cross mark. Okay, so that's where I'm at right now. I have a 4.5 inch cross mark from the very bottom of this to the top. And this can vary. It's probably about 3/4. If your hands are smaller, it's more like 1/2 inch. This height of this section right here. So if you're a guy, definitely do 3/4. I did 3/4.
That cross section is the elevator
Yes.
or double. Because there's this kind of different than that.
This cross section
Yeah,
here.
that was the 2.5 inches.
Yeah. Then I also gave myself more, and you might want to do that too. Just hair on either side
Okay.
or more. So after you get that shape, you need the remaining shape of your thumb. And it's going to take on a shape that is round at the top here. It's going to come down gently, organically, and then swoop back in to meet this widest part of your thumb. So, let me draw it real quick and show you what the shape is that you're going for. It's like a gentle swoop. And it will change if you have a really thin, stretchy material. This is just from eyeballing and knowing what the thumb needs. But there's not an exact science unless you measure each part of your thumb and tell what you want. So it's going to look like this natural S swoop. So you can measure, but it should look about like this. And then that's going to get folded right on that line there, and then you're going to have an exact symmetrical shape on the other side. So now you should have a piece that looks about like this. And once this is cut out, you're gonna have it sewn together like this, right? So imagine that fitting your thumb like that, right? It's gonna be like that. Okay. Gloves are very fun to make, you guys, and it's a little bit because it's a contained project that you can be really tedious and take your time with it, but it's also quick because it's small. I was gonna say I've only ever hand sewn gloves, but I did try machine sewing it, and it's so small and tight that it really is frustrating when you try to machine sew it. I would suggest hand sewing at least your first glove, Okay, but let's finish this base of the hand now too. We have the cross marks that tell you where the thumb wants to come out of the pattern. And I need to give a hole right in the center. Now, this can be exactly centered in this line, can be exactly symmetrical and centered on this grain line, or you can give it a little bit of a shift because your thumb goes toward the front, right? It's like a little bit more towards the front inside palm of your hand. Some people will just say forget it, it's fine to do it centered and symmetrical, or other people like that nuance to it and they push it to one side or the other. So you have to know which side is which when you're doing this. Is this going to be the inside or is this going to be the inside? For demonstration's sake, I'm just going to do centered, but know that if you wanted to put it towards the palm of your hand, you would just move it over like less than 1/4 of an inch. Just move it very slightly over toward the palm of the hand side of your glove pattern. But so now the shape of the hole that's going to let your thumb come through looks like this pointy top egg. And I used those cross marks at the top and bottom when I found the length of that area, or when we were drawing off the hand shape. That's where my thumb, and this, I gave it a little bit extra, like I'm doing with everything. So this is going to give you about where and about the size that your thumb needs to come out of that glove and be comfortable. And that's why you can move it just ever so slightly this way toward the palm, or if it's the other side of the hand this way. But this will change as you are getting your sample made and you're making adjustments to make it perfect. But this length, this measurement right here, has to be able to sew to this curve. So it's a lot of real estate to make up. When you are truing up your pattern and seeing if your thumb piece is going to fit into the hole, you have to compare those two measurements. The measurement of the curve on the bottom of your thumb and the measurement of the hole that your thumb is coming through. Now, this is your sort of fold line right here for your thumb. So this is going to get sewn together to this, right? But then this is the circular part that you're going to create by sewing your thumb together. So it gets plopped right into there. So you might find that you'll have to stretch this out more. Stretch this out even further, the bottom of your thumb pattern. So far now we have a base of your glove with your 4 fingers, your pointer, middle, ring, and pinky. We have a hole for your thumb right in the center. And you should have a pretty good working thumb pattern. Remember, it's going to change a bunch once you start to true it together, once you're figuring out how much seam allowance you need, if you need any at all. But the last thing we need to make now, the last 3 little patterns are the gussets for in between the fingers. You have to make, and people do this differently as well. This pattern, we're going to do gussets that are one full piece, that are connected in the center. It travels from the top of one finger, goes down to the bottom of it, and then travels back up with no seams in the very crevice of your finger. So you're going to have 3 long gussets that are about a 1/2 inch wide and like 5 inches long, about there. But you need to measure your fingers to do this, and they're all going to be different sizes. So you would do, for my pointer, my index to my middle would be the first gusset I make, and from the very crevice of in between these 2 fingers, my index finger is about 3 inches, and then my middle finger is about 3 1/2. So that's going to give me a 6 1/2 inch gusset for this first one. 6 1/2, because I have 3 inch long index, and then I have a 3 1/2 inch long middle. So you can give yourself a line that is 6 1/2 inches long. Or however long your gusset is.
Should we measure it from our pattern or not our hands?
That's a good point. So Levi just asked, should we measure from our fingers or our patterns? That's a really good point. Ideally, it would be both would work, but I would say see what the difference is. Measure one of them and see what the difference is. And if it is a big difference, I would probably go with your pattern, because that's what you're actually sewing to, right? So I have the same thing, so you might have that. I have again 3 inches for my index and 3 1/2 for my middle on my pattern. So that works out okay for me. But that's a good option that he brings up. You can measure your pattern, and that's probably going to give you even more accurate measurement for sewing to your actual piece. So I have my first gusset. You want to definitely label it. Say index to middle, or number 1. However you want to communicate this to yourself, label it accordingly so you don't mix them up. I'm going to do index to middle. Now give yourself another measurement. It's just going down the line. You want to measure the other side of your, and the other side of your middle finger isn't going to be the same, because what I'm doing is measuring all the way down in this crevice, and that's higher than this crevice down here. So while this side of my middle finger is 3 1/2, this side is only 3 3/8. And then I have 2 7/8. So you gotta do a little bit of math here, you guys. And then your third and last one is just gonna be the ring finger measurement and your pinky measurement. So I have 3 1/4 and 2 1/4. So give yourself whatever type of label you want to use to communicate to yourself, even if it's M to R, R to P, or ring to pinky, or just 1, 2, and 3, and you know that these come first. Boop, boop, boop. So now you have 3 lines established, right? For your 3 gussets. Now you need to give those gussets some width. It's normally around 1/2 inch, but measure your finger. You can see if you have really dainty, you might have a 3/8 width of your hands. I'm gonna do a 1/2 inch at the very center, and I'm going to taper it slightly at the ends. And they should be round too. Just think about the shape of your fingers. They get smaller at the top and they're round. You're just making up that section of your hand that the gloves don't touch. This part's only gonna be on the top and the back of your hand. We have to fill in these middle areas of our fingers. So, if I'm giving it a 1/2 inch width and I'm tapering it a little bit slightly at the ends to give a smaller rounded end on the gussets, it would turn out like this. I'm gonna give a parallel line right down that center line I made, and on either side I'm gonna do a 1/4 inch, and then the other side's gonna also get a 1/4 inch. That's gonna give me my 1/2 inch base. And then I'm gonna freestyle the tapered section. I'm gonna find my center of my gusset right here, and then I'm going to freestyle taper it ever so slightly into a rounded curve on either side. So it's going to look like a skinny hot dog, basically. And you'll notice that I'm using a marker. So my mark is very thick. It's not precise like we're used to. But it should look about like this. It's almost like a bullet on either side. So that's a 1/4 inch and a 1/4 inch to make a full 1/2 inch. Naomi, you want the camera closer, you said? You see, Kenzie, that I took that length, found the center of it, and I left that the widest part, because it's going to be down here. And then I tapered it slightly and a little bit round and pointed. So you're going to do that with each of these. So you'll have 3 that look like this. I'm going to finish off this one real quick. So I have my 1/2 inch width gusset. This is my ring to pinky finger. I found my center line and I stopped it on either side with a sort of rounded, pointed, but slightly tapered freestyle shape. And that it's weird to sort of describe this because it's just a learned shape that you get, and I don't really have a science behind it. Well, the science is that we're just filling in the shape that's needed, right? Which is all pattern making. So Jonathan, did you see, or are you at that point where each gusset is like that? That makes sense, right? Yeah. Now, this gusset, this center line is not going to be the point where it hits in the crevice of between your fingers because it's uneven. You need to communicate to yourself where that is, and depending on your material, you might not be able to cut any type of notch there. You might have to give yourself a tailor tack, and because this one I think was 2 1/4 versus 3 1/4, my ring to pinky, I'm gonna have to have a mark on my gusset that tells me where the crevice is. Now, if you're like me, I do a lot of things that are like very fast, gung-ho, freestyle. So if you just have a piece of a gusset cut out and you place it next to your sewn, partially sewn glove, you can fold the gusset and see where it wants to line up. And that's another way. If you're really quick and sort of, you're doing a sample, you want to just see if it works, that type of stuff, that's sort of my style. So you can either be very official and, measure it perfectly and give yourself notes, or just go for it. So you're going to end up with these 3 gussets. That's the main point. That is everything to your glove pattern. This is going to finish off just like the other side. So you would fold it in half, where we folded it the first time, right? Right down the center. Trace off your shape of your hand that you got. So you would have a full glove with 7 fingers. This middle one is connected in one big finger. So it would be like that. So if you want to do that, go ahead and, I didn't bring my patterning wheel, is why I'm not doing it right now. But, so you basically would start like that and finish off the other side of your glove. Your length is arbitrary. You can do whatever length you like, opera, little tiny ones that are cut all the way up to mid-hand. Like, you can do just to the wrist, like Michael Jackson gloves, whatever you want. But now you have to choose what material you're going to make these gloves out of. Are you going to do a really thin jersey that stretches a lot? Are you going to do a nice lambskin that also stretches and gives but is thicker, much thicker than jersey? So it could be that this doesn't need any seam allowance at all, right? If you had your knitswear class, you know that there are very specific rules about adding seam allowance. So if you have something that stretches, it might not need any at all. Maybe you give it like a 1/16 of an inch. The other thing is that your seam allowance is living in this very tiny, tiny space. You're gonna have these itty bitty seams that either have to live on the inside of the glove, the inside of the construction next to the skin, or they have to live on the outside of the glove. So you would have sort of a deconstructed seam aesthetic to it. For leather, if you're gonna do gloves in leather, you want to give a tiny bit of seam allowance. You need that extra because the leather itself is gonna take up a lot of room when you're constructing it. So give it like a 1/16 to an 1/8. You can always cut away the extra seam allowance, right? If you're starting to put together your sample and you see that one is too big, just start sewing it at a slightly closer seam allowance so it does fit properly, and then cut the excess away. This is not an exact science the first time you do it. You have to test your material, test your pattern, and make adjustments just like we always do. And also you can change things up from here. Once you get this standard pattern, you can make all sorts of cool gloves. Like there are ones that have different sections in it, and it's for mobility and different, different purposes. But you can make modifications like that into whatever glove you like. Let's see. What have we not talked about? When you're sewing it together, you can imagine sewing these tiny little pieces with a machine would make you crazy. So I really recommend just hand sewing it. You can do that whip stitch where it's going to cover the outside of your seam allowance and sort of pull it in, give it like an overlock stitch effect. But if your fabric doesn't ravel, which it shouldn't, because a lot of glove material is either a knit, which doesn't ravel, or it's a leather, which obviously doesn't ravel, you can do just a strong back stitch. You don't want to do some wimpy big stitch. They have to be tiny, minuscule stitches, and it just takes time and patience. This is like a knitting project in that you sit down with it and spend time and just let your brain relax in that type of project. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Yasmin was waiting. But so how do you guys feel? Did anybody have any questions about that? Did you get your patterns finished? And what are you thinking? You good? Everything makes sense? Okay. All right, my lovies. Well, that is it pretty much then for this class. We don't really have much that we need to do together, although I need to talk to a few people. If you want to stay on, I'll keep the computer Zoom on. Otherwise, you guys email me if you have questions. Remember that your assignments are coming up this week. Next week is Miss Brown on Monday, and then Wednesday is going to be our shared technique or application. Kylie, are you raising your hand? I think you're on mute. Oh, maybe it's me. Say again?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
For the like, if you're doing an opera glove, for the forearm line, do you keep it at an angle?
Yeah, that's a good point. The angle is pretty important. And just like anything else, it's going to make a difference with the material that you're going to use, if it stretches, how tight you want it. Sometimes if you have like a nice leather and you want it slouchy, then you would go wider. But you can double check that too if you want to measure the circumference of the forearm and then measure the width of where you want it to end. But yes, definitely give it a taper out, a width, with the longer you go. So it's basically just a symmetrical shape with these 7 fingers. 2 of them are connected in the middle, and that's why I say 7. But yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. A zipper is good if you want a really tight fit. Oh, that's a good thing I gotta say really quick. So think about this tiny wrist area and trying to put on a glove through that wrist. If it's sewn completely and it doesn't stretch, then you cannot fit your big old hand through that tiny wrist area, right? So either you have to have a opening with a tiny keyhole and button to allow it to open and then close, or if you have this entire length, you put a zipper up it and it has to release this tiny point right here. So the zipper has to get close to, and it's on this side or wherever you want it really. As long as it makes sense with the anatomy and putting it on. But you do need to be able to open up this smallest area to be able to get your hand in once it's completed and constructed.
You could just do like a zipper this small.
Yeah.
If you have a long one, you could just set it in
Totally.
small.
Yeah, if your material and the size of the gauntlet part of your glove is big enough that you can get your hand through it, Levi just pointed out that you could have a tiny little zipper right here just for the opening to release that to get your hand into. So it's all about this opening up this area right here, however way you can engineer it to get around that. Okay, your full pair of gloves is due tomorrow by 8 a.m. It has to be perfect and in fabulous leather, okay, you guys?
Sounds good.
I could. All right, how about anybody else? You guys good? All right, stick around if you want. We'll be here.
Can you hear me?
Hey, Naomi, yeah, what's up?
Could you upload pictures of the I guess food tech pattern that you just made?
Yeah, totally. I will make a little PDF of slides of the different steps.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Hey, can you hear me?
Hey, Leanne.
Hi. I'm not sure if you already went over this, but to add a seam allowance on the glove, how do you do it for the individual fingers?
Yeah, so it's very delicate and minuscule. You're gonna go, obviously after you clean all of these lines up, true everything up with your ruler, make them really straight and pretty, clean up the roundness on the top. But afterward, if you do want a seam allowance, the only way that you wouldn't want a seam allowance is if your material stretches enough, it doesn't ravel to where you can hand sew it and just take like a 1/16 of an inch off of the edge to combine your pieces. That's not gonna affect it, especially if you have a stretch material. It's gonna want to fit perfectly like that. But if you are adding seam allowance because your material needs it, you would take it around all of these and pretty much disappear into almost nothingness in the bottom here. So you would, let me see. Just gonna draw it super quick for you real quick on one finger. So you would basically give yourself, let's say you wanted to do an 1/8 inch, maybe it's a 16th, or maybe it's a little more, depending on whatever you're trying to do. But you would follow these lines exactly, and then try to get a little bit smaller right there. You don't want to do meeting that crevice exactly, but it's sort of like a touch and go science with it. But not too special. You just basically give yourself that line all the way around, and including here on the inside, everything that you're going to be sewing, you would just give your designated seam allowance. Does that sort of answer? I know it's a little bit confusing with this area.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Alright.
So I'll be in short about my project. If that's right.
Yeah, are you coming into class?
Yeah.
Okay. Alright, I'll be here.
Okay. Sounds good.
Who else did I need to talk to? Was there somebody else? Oh, yep, Consini, but she's here. Alright, you guys, I'll keep this computer open. Just yell at me if you need my attention.
So this part of the thumb here would get sewn in. It would all just get straight. Nice. Yeah. They were my old fabric scissors, and they